Welcome to another edition of Undercurrents from Unheard. I'm Emily Jashinsky, your host, and this is, of course, a twice-weekly news show that is covering the news and the ideas that matter beneath the surface. Now, if you're enjoying the content, please go ahead and click subscribe. It really means a lot to us. And if you want to help build the show, you can go to undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience where we do AMAs, we do subscriber-only episodes. So make sure to go to undercurrents.tv for that. And a quick reminder to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review. It is really helpful as we're trying to build this brand new channel. Your feedback has meant the world to me, to our team. It's so appreciated. So coming up on today's show, I'm going to do a breakdown of what nobody is talking about when it comes to the wild Twitter space conversation between Elon Musk and Donald Trump last night. And it was wild, but I don't think anybody's really picking up on why. A lot of people aren't. They're distracted per usual by the delays and all of that. They were distracting, to be fair. I'm also going to talk to James Billow, Unheard newsroom editor, about the situation unfolding in Eastern Europe as we speak, which I think is kind of getting buried also in the news cycle. There's so many questions I have for James, and he's going to break down some of the developments, which, by the way, we're about to hear from James about the largest incursion into Russian territory since World War II. So hugely important topic, undercovered in the media, and James is going to do an awesome deep dive for us on that. I am going to do a little bit of a dive into Democratic policies on free speech, why we're not hearing much from Dems in the media about what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and honestly for that matter, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance plan to do when it comes to suppression and censorship of speech on social media platforms, why it matters. Then we're going to be joined by a really special guest, Susan Crabtree, national political correspondent at Real Clear Politics, who has been the foremost newsbreaker on Secret Service's failures leading up to the Trump assassination attempt and in the wake of the assassination attempt, when right now we have candidates vying for the presidency who are at risk every single day because they're campaigning out on the trail, and Secret Service is an absolute mess. Whether you're on the left or the right, this story that Susan has been covering every single day, she's been breaking news on the left or right, that's been promoted by members of Congress, that has really changed the game and changed the conversation. This is incredible, incredible stuff. She has a new story out actually today. So we're going to get into all of that. Stay tuned for Susan Crabtree, for James Billow, and now let's get to the news of the day. Everyone is waiting with bated breath for a potential strike from Iran. Meanwhile, though, Donald Trump, one of the major party's presidential nominees, was talking for 2 hours on a Spaces, an X Spaces, with billionaire ex-owner Elon Musk last night that really captured the attention of the Beltway. The top line story from all of this in the news media, at least the legacy media, has been, oh my gosh, it was 40 minutes late to start. Just a redo of the DeSantis campaign launch debacle. And, that's so pathetic, blah, blah, blah. Now, do I think it's crazy that they had what Elon Musk claimed was a cyber attack? Then after he claimed it was a cyber attack, sources told The Verge, and I think other news outlets got this as well, that there wasn't actually a DDoS cyber attack. That the rest of Twitter was working fine, the rest of X was working fine. It was just the Spaces crashing because there was interest in it. Yeah, I still think Donald Trump, of all people, who seemed to be very taken with what Elon Musk told him was a record-smashing event. It crashed because they were breaking all of the records and there was so much public attention on it. Listen, there's a tiny fraction of the public that actually is on Twitter, period. Still aren't a lot of average Americans on Twitter, by sort of relative to the standards of how many people exist in the United States. Daily users of Twitter are a pretty small fraction, and that's compared with other social media as well. So I don't think what happened when the stream crashed or when the space crashed is going to move the needle one bit really in either direction. I don't think it was great. I think Donald Trump, was just berating the National Association of Black Journalists, people for being late and having poor equipment a couple of weeks ago. So I can't imagine Donald Trump was super happy about that, but maybe Elon Musk mollified him with news about all of the records being smashed. Either way, it was rambling, and it went on for a long time. It started late. There's people on the sort of Elon Trump side, because Elon Musk, who, by the way, is a defense contractor, who has now endorsed Donald Trump and says he's giving money to Donald Trump, there are people on that sort of side of the fence who were saying, yes, it did smash all the records. Everything negative is just media cope. They just hate Trump. They hate Elon Musk. And it was a smashing success. I don't think that's right either. I do, though, want to focus on the bigger picture. Because for all the media chatter and for all of the campaign propaganda, I think something serious happened in the midst of this rambling 2-hour conversation where they ended up talking about Fukushima and Tampon Tim, all kinds of different roads. At one point, Trump said there's a place called Argentina and started talking about Milei. They covered basically everything. But Greg Gutfeld, actually of Fox News, posted what I thought was a very insightful tweet on X. He said the bigger story is that two of the most important people in the world agree, most important world figures, he said, agree on the world. Basically that these two hugely consequential, wealthy, powerful men have come to the same place, have come to a point of consensus, really, on some really critical major issues. And they hashed them out without any campaign aides, giving them folders and documents. They were really just talking, which is very typical of both Donald Trump and Elon Musk, obviously. It's not surprising, but we take for granted, I think, how unusual it is that you have something like this occurring. We're sort of used to Donald Trump, even when he was president of the United States, speaking off the cuff like he was at a press conference for Celebrity Apprentice. But now that you add Elon Musk to the picture, and you saw the common ground that they shared on virtually everything. Elon Musk started the space by saying it's not going to be adversarial. He's like, I'm not going to be George Stephanopoulos. It's not going to be adversarial. It's just going to be a conversation. And they had a space, no pun intended, where they could actually do that. I'm about to take a hard left turn here, but please bear with me because I think that these things are absolutely 100% connected. So there was an excellent piece in City Journal just yesterday where it was written, quote, the main justification for, quote, gender-affirming care for minors in the United States has been that, quote, all major U.S. medical associations support it. Critics of this supposed consensus have argued that it is not grounded in high-quality research or decades of honest and robust deliberation among clinicians with different viewpoints and experiences. Instead, it is the result of a small number of ideologically driven doctor association members and LGBT-focused committees who exploit their colleagues' trusts. Physicians presenting different viewpoints are silenced or kept away from decision-making circles, ensuring the appearance of unanimity. This has been the top line coming from the medical community for the past decade. It has led to likely thousands of horrible cases of gender-confused young people going through what, as Abigail Schreier dubbed, are irreversible procedures, whether they're surgical, whether they're psychological, and as this article pointed out, the U.S. consensus now appears to have its first big fracture. This is just as of this week. In July, the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, a major medical association representing 11,000 members and over 90% of the plastic surgery field in the U.S. and Canada, told me, the author wrote, that, quote, it has not endorsed any organization's practice recommendations for the treatment of adolescents with gender dysphoria. ASPS acknowledged that there is, quote, considerable uncertainty as to the long-term efficacy for the use of chest and genital surgical interventions, and that the existing evidence base is viewed as low quality, low certainty. If you have been paying attention to this issue for years, you have known that this is the case. Honest observers who came to this as full supporters of the LGBT cause have known that that is the case. So what the hell does it have to do with Donald Trump and Elon Musk going on Twitter? Well, as Greg Gutfeld said, something hugely important being lost in this conversation as the media basically ignores the City Journal report on the ASPS and this fracture in what was the consensus as they reported it for a decade, is that you have two important figures that basically agree on the world. Now remember, while we're talking about X, that years ago, Jack Dorsey himself banned misgendering. You couldn't say some of this stuff on X. And again, while there's just a fraction of the American public on this platform, it's where journalists spend their time, it's where political activists spend their time, it is where a lot of the discourse is formed. The narratives are forged on this platform. And for a long time, you couldn't have an honest conversation, a serious conversation about what is now a consensus being fractured by the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, not a group with a political, ideological, partisan agenda in any way whatsoever. Now, we're likely to see more of this, but I think if we put this next article up on the screen, this is leading the front page on Unheard this morning from Thomas Fozzi. Fascinating, he writes, the latest salvo in the ongoing battle between Elon Musk and the EU came courtesy of the X owner. He revealed that in the run-up to the European elections, X was offered, quote, an illegal secret deal. If the platform would agree to secretly censoring online speech, then the European Commission wouldn't fine it for violations of its new online content moderation law, the Digital Services Act. X refused to cooperate, but all other major platforms accepted the deal. This piece is well worth your time, and it is an extremely important landmark, as was that Twitter space that happened in the context as all of this is playing out. Elon Musk's battle with the EU is playing out in the bigger context of this US election and in the bigger context of this worldwide, this global battle to allow speech to be free in the West and on these platforms. Obviously, these platforms operate under very different rules in countries outside the West. But in the West, where we have standards of free speech that we're going to discuss later in this show, sometimes they differ significantly, but they are, we take pride in, relatively free compared to other societies throughout history and in the rest of the world today. This battle is not just about free speech. It's about what the fruit of free speech is, which should be, theoretically, better policies, which should be, theoretically, healthier, happier people because they feel like they are being heard. Elon Musk is one of the very few people disrupting this. Donald Trump is one of the very few people disrupting this. The New York Times did a very splashy profile of Bari Weiss from the Free Press in their pages that the media just obsessed over the last couple of days. Everyone either, they just wanted to post on X, of course, their favorable opinion of Bari Weiss or their dunk on Bari Weiss, etc. But again, what we're seeing now is institutions either being taken by people that disagree with the elite consensus or institutions springing up by people that disagree with the elite consensus. Elon Musk, Bari Weiss. And there are some disagreements between these people. Donald Trump and Bari Weiss don't agree on a lot, even if Donald Trump and Elon Musk do agree on a lot, although there was some fractures that came up in their conversation, specifically as they started talking about climate change and some other things. But think about that. It's really remarkable. It's really remarkable. Whatever you believe about Donald Trump, whether you vote for Donald Trump or not, whether you own a Tesla or you hate a Tesla or you're one of those owners that slaps a I hate Elon Musk sticker on your Tesla, it is remarkable that these two men came together in this space, literally in this space, and had that conversation in the context of what is happening in Europe. Because if you believe that open debate, that broad freedoms protecting speech are important to the West, are important to your country, whether it's the United States or the United Kingdom, if you believe that, I'm not saying you have to vote for Donald Trump. I'm not saying you have to like Elon Musk. I am saying, though, that there is a consensus gelling in the shadow of the elite consensus that has been rock hard for a long time now in places like Davos and NATO and all of that. There's serious challenges to it. And in the UK, it's leading to civil unrest. In the United States, we've seen plenty of civil unrest too, and I pray we don't see more of it. But the good news is that apparently we still have enough freedom to have these conversations, and it would be really refreshing to see somebody other than Elon Musk and somebody other than Donald Trump, somebody other than Bari Weiss, people who have, for years now been in this direction against the sort of elite consensus on clamping down on civil liberties, speech in particular, and new media and all of these platforms. It'd be really refreshing if maybe we saw a little bit of respect from the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaign towards free speech. I'm going to talk about that later in the show, but it's just I don't want to take for granted in all of the media chatter about how silly so much of this conversation was. It was. How silly it was that it was late. It was, and whether the propaganda is true or not. Mostly, it's not. I don't want us to lose in all of that how groundbreaking what happened and what is happening. It's not just about that space, but what is happening with Elon Musk as an individual, someone who sort of rides the fence between establishment and anti-establishment, super defense contractor into clean energy, was a big part of that revolution, and is now somewhat heterodox on these culture war issues. There's something happening that I think the powers that be, the gatekeepers, aren't fully aware of, and it's happening right under their noses, and they're not picking up on it. We're joined now for a deep dive into what's happening in Eastern Europe this week by Unheard newsroom editor James Billow. James, it seems to me this story has gotten almost buried, dare I say, in a crazy presidential news cycle here in the United States. The situation in the Middle East seems also to be sucking up a lot of the oxygen, but huge developments out of Eastern Europe. Tell us what's going on.
We have seen a lot of war fatigue with Ukraine for the past year or so as this war of attrition grinds on in the eastern part of the country. But this raid in Kursk occurred on August 6th, and it is the largest attack to have occurred on Russian soil since World War II. So it's a hugely significant attack. And as of today, Ukrainian forces now claim to control nearly 400 square miles of Russian territory, as well as 28 settlements. And there have been all these clips surfacing of Russian soldiers surrendering and an extremely unhappy Russian president because it resulted in 130,000 civilian evacuations. It's pretty clear that Putin was caught by surprise here. And so here's a little exchange he had with the Kursk governor.
Глубина проникновения на территорию Курской области составляет 12 километров. Ширина по фронту 40 километров.
Послушайте, Алексей Борисович, это военное ведомство вам доложит, какая там ширина и глубина. Вы расскажите нам про социально-экономическую ситуацию.
So Putin is a little bit rattled, and he claimed that the West is fighting Russia with the hands of Ukraine, again, really emphasizing this idea that this is a Western-led proxy battle, and that tense exchange with the Kursk governor is further testament to that. What makes this raid different from the previous incursions is that this is a proper offensive. It's not like a light skirmish like Belgorod. Ukraine is using 3 brigades, so this is a proper offensive that Ukraine has taken full ownership of.
Well, James, can I actually just pause on that point? Because we started this segment talking about the news cycle and how because the war has become one of attrition, it's sort of gotten almost buried in the news cycle as attention has turned to the Middle East, but it's hugely consequential. You just said this is the largest incursion in Russian territory since World War II, some 400 square feet. So you mentioned the battalions as well. What in the last couple of days, and even in the last 24 hours that we've seen, how does that compare to what you've described as the light skirmishes that we've seen pop up here and there in this war of attrition? What's different now?
About a year ago, the largest sort of transnational, trans-border attack was the Belgorod raid. But what was different about that raid from this week's raid is that Ukraine was still employing some degree of plausible deniability. They were operating with far-right militia groups operating within Russia. They were empowering Russian mercenaries to basically destabilize Russia from within. What's different here is that there are questions about whether this is a sign that it's the last gasp of the Ukrainian defense because, okay, we're now fighting the war on Russia's terms. They're winning the war of attrition. They have more manpower. Their economy is geared towards producing more armor, more equipment, and everything is basically working towards their favor. So this was an attempt to sort of reverse that momentum.
Well, and can I ask you about that? Because the big question in my mind as, just kind of a layman on the military question here is, what are they going to do with that territory? They now have 400 some square miles in Russia. What do you do with it going forward?
Well, this is the problem that has been posed to the Ukrainian leadership. They have explicitly stated today that they do not want to hold on to the territory.
So like as a bargaining chip to get different territory in the Donbass back.
Exactly. But the issue is that it's diverting incredibly valuable resources, manpower and material from areas like Kharkiv, where there's huge fighting still ongoing, towards these parts of Russia where actually the result of the fighting isn't hugely consequential. So this is again reiterating the point that this might be a symbolic victory, a Pyrrhic victory, but either way, it's unlikely to change the course of the whole war. But what's interesting is the degree of Western involvement in this whole process. So we had Senator Lindsey Graham already in Ukraine describing Kursk as this Bold, brilliant, and beautiful raid.
Wait, did you say he's already in Ukraine before we play the clip? Is he?
Yes.
He's already in Ukraine?
Of course.
He materialized in Ukraine immediately. He just sort of, all he had to do, it's like the port key in Harry Potter. Like he just grabs onto his golf club and suddenly he's in Kyiv.
He always knows where to be at the right time.
What I think about Kursk, bold, brilliant, beautiful. Keep it up. Putin started this, kick his ass. Bottom line is to the administration, I appreciate your support. Let these people fight.
The question is, how involved were the West in this whole process? Now, the US claims that it wasn't given advance notice of the raid, but it's very hard to imagine that this wasn't done without their tacit approval. We had a report from Politico recently saying that allies did in fact give a greenish light to the operation.
A greenish light?
What they mean by that is that they basically didn't stop it from happening, but were aware of it. That's especially the case when you consider just how deep the ties between NATO and Ukraine now are. This is coming a month after that NATO summit in Washington. So it's impossible to believe that Western allied forces did not know what was going on here.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I was going to say that is almost impossible to believe. And James, actually, I was reading to see what the Russian propaganda was on this morning. I went to RT International, and they floated this idea that, well, not floated, they heavily suggested that it was Joe Biden stepping down from the Democratic ticket that made it a ripe time for Ukraine to go forward with this incursion into Russian territory, because he's, sort of this figurehead. American foreign policy post-November is up in the air, and they want to almost, and I'm curious what you think about this, they want to almost paint Kamala Harris into a corner and force her to support this, essentially, because she's now at the head of the ticket.
And I would flip that as well and saying that Biden, who is now essentially a lame duck president, he can't achieve much legislatively in Congress. The only way he can make a real difference now in his final few months is on the battlefield, is in these wars in Ukraine, Israel, and even China. So he might be really trying to cement his legacy here by going full Tonto. And that's what's probably the most interesting part of this, is that both the US and German operated vehicles are now on Russian soil. And this is a huge turn. So just think about Germany in particular, which once prided itself on being this, at least rhetorically, quite a realist country in terms of Europe. Just 3 months ago, Chancellor Olaf Scholz had made it a condition that German weapons were not to be used on Russian territory. But then just a few days later, he changed his position to say that actually it could happen and that it was in line with international law. Biden then follows suit and adds a condition that weaponry could strike Russian territory, but it had to be near Kharkiv, where a lot of the fighting is going on. Well, if you look at a map, Kharkiv is 150 miles away from Kursk. So there's clearly some blurring of the lines here going on already.
That is incredibly interesting, because I saw H.R. McMaster reacting to this, who's obviously a military leader here in the United States. He was saying this is sort of, to paraphrase Reagan and to paraphrase McMaster, this is peace through strength in action, that the only way Ukraine was ever going to win this war was by flexing its strength and its military might. And that's what's going to put Putin on his back heel and end everything and fast forward to peace talks or to keep Russia permanently out of the Donbass. On the other hand, there's an incredibly serious argument to be made that when you have German and American weapons and or tanks on Russian soil, and the largest incursion on Russian soil since World War II, now we have two nuclear powers, actually multiple nuclear powers, involved in all of this. Is this lurching towards a Franz Ferdinand moment? And that's something we never know until, months later, basically.
On the nuclear point, the FT came out with a big story today detailing all these secret files about all these nuclear warheads on Russian naval ships geared towards different targets across Europe, which just goes to show the lengths that Russia would be willing to go, and emphasizing this idea of total war. This predates the Ukrainian war. This is from 2008 to 2014. But to your earlier point, I think it's worth reflecting on just how far we've come since the start of the war and even before. Because all those self-declared limits on direct involvement have been systematically dismantled. In 2017, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the US first officially provided Ukraine with lethal weapons. Then came armored vehicles and tanks in 2023, and then came F-16 fighter jets and long-range missiles in 2024. And then came the authorization to use those weapons inside of Russia. So now we're seeing Ukraine using US and German armored vehicles launching a direct ground invasion in Russia. So we're really seeing a huge expansion of the war effort here by the West.
And testing the theory that peace through strength is going to push Putin on his heel rather than actually antagonize him further. And you're always testing that out. It's always a matter of probability. But every indication that we have had from Vladimir Putin over the last 10 years is that he sees this territory, Crimea and the Donbass, as legitimately Russian, and he sees his mission as to, I won't go so far as to say, reassemble the Russian Empire, but I do think he really believes, it's not just what I think everybody at this point thinks it, and you can't really have it both ways, as some neoconservatives try to, that Putin on the one hand wants to reassemble the Russian Empire, and on the other hand he's just going to run with his tail between his legs as soon as you go into his territory. I think he is very serious about putting Ukraine back into Russian territory, at least the Donbass. So testing this seems really risky, and it's just, far be it from me to, I don't want to control our military, James, but I'm not sure that I trust the people who are controlling this situation right now either. James Billow, Unheard Newsroom editor, that was so helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we will be back with more Undercurrents right after this. All right, well, 3 years ago, Prince Harry, who is still pretty new here in the United States, told Dax Shepard on an episode of Armchair Expert, quote, "I've got so much I want to say about the First Amendment as I sort of understand it, but it is bonkers." And, well, he seemed to concede his own ignorance a bit, at least. From a British perspective, Harry is right. American speech freedom is indeed bonkers. Just not in the way he meant it, of course, but that did not stop the Aspen Institute from keeping Prince Harry on a commission related to disinformation, of all things. We'll return to that in just a moment. These differences between the UK and the US, though, are critically important right now, as Keir Starmer's government seeks to crack down on, quote, disinformation in the wake of the Southport unrest, which, by the way, actually probably was partially caused by some disinformation. It's shockingly easy to imagine what could happen here. Tom Slater wrote a great column reminding readers incensed by Starmer's focus on speech policing that, quote, "The more mundane truth is that the UK's slide into woke authoritarianism has taken place over decades, not days." Slater adds, quote, "Britain's almost 60-year experiment in hate speech legislation is a warning to the world. We first introduced an offense of, quote, inciting racial hatred in 1965 in the Race Relations Act, fast forward to today, and we now have laws against incitement to religious hatred, grossly offensive online communications, and a police force who routinely harass women for calling men men on the internet. Cops have also taken to quietly recording non-crime hate incidents against citizens' names when the pesky law gets in the way of their authoritarianism." Slater continued with some really important numbers. The upshot of this, he added, is a scale of speech policing that is surely unprecedented in our history. In 2017, an investigation by the Times found that 9 people a day were being arrested for posting allegedly offensive messages online, with 3,395 arrested in 2016 alone. Even then, that investigation was limited to one piece of legislation, the Communications Act, and the real number is almost certainly higher, not least because many police forces didn't respond to the survey. Greg Lukianoff, president of America's estimable Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, argues that on the basis of those partial numbers alone, get this, Britain is comfortably locking up more people today for speech crimes than America did during the first Red Scare. So Slater's point here is huge, that after the UK opened up the door to broadly defined restrictions, it's really never come back. The result is a climate where many people feel silenced and suppressed to the point where, as MLK Jr. said, they're resorting to the language of the unheard. Freedom of speech actually helps protect us from civil unrest. So where is the US on this very, very slippery slope? Here's the Democratic Party's vice presidential nominee just last year.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
Back in 2019, when Kamala Harris was running for the Democratic Party nomination, she pledged to, quote, hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms, because they have a responsibility to help fight back against this threat to our democracy. And of course, the administration for which she's served as vice president made good on that promise as we now know, the Biden administration pressured social media companies to censor certain speech that was broadly defined as disinformation or hate. This was wrong, and it was dangerous because it could set precedents that lead to more unrest. And it's likely we'd see more of this from a Harris-Walz administration under the sway of younger voters who are increasingly convinced our concept of free speech, as Prince Harry would say, is, quote, bonkers. Republicans, by the way, only happen to be solid on this question right now because they've been subject to most of the recent censorship efforts. But many, not all, many, failed to apply their very same standards of free expression when campus Gaza protests were on the table. So everyone deserves to get these questions on the campaign trail. But it's barely even a topic of concern for the media, which is arguably affected more than any other profession. And this is nothing new, of course. Remember the Aspen Institute we mentioned earlier, where Prince Harry is on a disinformation commission? You may recall them from the Twitter files. Michael Schellenberger reported years ago now that the Aspen Institute hosted a tabletop exercise in 2020 for social media heads and journalists. It weirdly involved wargaming, quote, an 11-day scenario in October 2020 that began with the imaginary release of falsified records related to Hunter Biden's controversial employment by the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. When the laptop leaked, just weeks later, of course, journalists and tech leaders suppressed the New York Post's reporting like clockwork. Guess who happens to be a graduate of an Aspen Institute program and a recent speaker for the group? Kamala Harris. Tim Walz has spoken to them, as has J.D. Vance, although it's probably unlikely they'd invite him back now. Trump aides like Mike Pompeo have spoken to the Aspen Institute too. So all of this is to say, the elite consensus in America is shifting away from our norms on free speech. And concerning levels of opposition among louder, young voices could be just the permission that our leaders need to keep using these tools at their disposal. The fact that we're barely asking Harris and Walz to answer for their chilling remarks in the past speaks volumes about media's tolerance and even support for these anti-speech positions. Social media has basically given elites the ability to duct tape the mouths of every crank at every bar, since so many of our conversations now occur online rather than in real life. The power of these tools is way too tempting for them to ignore, but nothing can stop the spread of disinformation. It has always been with us, and it always will be with us. And in healthy societies, that's just fine. We can deal with it. Stick around, we'll be back with more right after this. All right, well, I'm so excited to be joined now by Real Clear Politics national political correspondent Susan Crabtree, one of the best reporters in the business who has been doing incredible and such critical work on the Secret Service story in the days after the attempted assassination on President Donald Trump. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. It's a privilege to talk to you amidst these crazy important reports you've been putting out, it feels like, every day.
Well, thank you so much for having it, Emily. And, it's an incredible topic to be delving into. And I don't think I've worked on a more important story in my lifetime. I've covered Secret Service for many years now, but not something like an assassination attempt that we haven't seen this in my lifetime. Well, certainly we did with Reagan. I was pretty young at that time. I think I was 12 when that happened, maybe younger. So this is something that we need answers to, and the Secret Service needs a complete overhaul. And it's really disconcerting what I'm uncovered in the last, since in the last month. It's almost been 1 month since the assassination attempt.
And there have been lapses in Secret Service before that you've reported on. We'll get to those in a moment, but if you could just start by taking us back to what you were hearing from sources as you started on this incredible story in the minutes, literally in the minutes, after the attempted assassination on former President Trump, now the candidate, the nominee for the Republican ticket. So what is going on? What are you hearing immediately in the aftermath? Because that launched this incredible breadth of reporting you've done since.
Yes. So that night, I was getting ready to go to Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. So I was scrambling, trying to get a hold of old sources. And actually, some of them came out of the woodwork to talk to me. And the first thing, I went back to look at what was the first thing I heard about this. And the first thing was look into the drone situation. they didn't have drones that day. They have a drone mitigation service. I'll have a story about this coming out. It'll be more technical later this week. But, that was pretty prescient to hear that night. Then the next morning I had to pack and I had to get on the plane. And as soon as I got on the plane, luckily I had good Wi-Fi, because people were coming out of the woodwork to talk to me that I had talked to. I frequently, every once in a while, when the Secret Service stories, security lapses come up, I talk to these people. They tell me things because I've known and developed these relationships for years, and it's sort of like the saddest thing is it's deja vu all over again, because these individuals are saying some of the same things. There's so many security lapses, and Congress looked into it back in 2014, and nothing got changed despite a blue ribbon panel. So in the first days afterward, the first 24 hours afterwards, I was hearing, look into it's called a site agent, or the lead agent. This person I'm told, it wasn't very competent, in a senior level member of the Secret Service, but never had this type of detailed open air forum where 50,000 people are coming. This person is a woman. I'm not disclosing her name out of concern for her safety, but didn't have this kind of on the ground experience for these types of complicated rallies with so many sightlines and actually so many people with an increased Iranian threat. We didn't really know about the increased Iranian threat until the Secret Service started pushing back on some of my early reports. Some of the first things I heard also were that they had the team that is the innermost security team that is on the regular detail for Donald Trump covers him. There's about 60 members of that team. Some of them are special agents. Some of them are support staff. But that they were asking for more assets from headquarters, and they were being denied repeatedly. I also heard one of the first things, and I reported this about 5 o'clock on the Sunday night afterwards, was that there was a misallocation of resources between the two competing events in Pennsylvania that day. That there was this huge Donald Trump rally in Butler, and then not very far away in Pittsburgh, there was a Jill Biden event that was 300 people at a closed inside casino, indoor casino, and that actually some of the assets, there were more serious assets that were being devoted to her event, and that I needed to really check into that. It turns out that some of that was proven a week later when Senator Grassley released to me details of his findings, that there were 3 assets, they're called post standards, that were assigned to the Donald Trump rally, only 3, and there were 12 assigned to the Jill Biden event. We're still trying to get more information, whether Jill Biden had a counter sniper. That would be hugely significant. We're still trying to get the allocation of all the resources that Jill Biden had compared to Donald Trump. They are stonewalling my questions on that.
Well, and Susan, can I ask you more about that? Because Secret Service, I've been shocked by this. You'd think if ever there were a moment for humility that they would maybe seem chastened, it would be this moment. And instead, they have come out swinging against well-sourced reports like your own. They have denied your reports by name. They've come out after Susan Crabtree's reporting here and defended themselves rather than kind of taking the L when you have this successful shot grazing the ear of a former president, current major ticket nominee. Why, based on what you've heard from sources and all of that, why are they being so defensive and not just putting their heads down and saying, damn it, we made a mistake. We need structural changes. We'll do better next time. Why on earth? What explains their attitude in the aftermath of all of this?
Well, it was funny to me because I had actually had a similar experience back in 2014 where the Secret Service was lying to me about an event, a security lapse I broke this particular security lapse. It was a man that had a gun that wasn't authorized to have a gun, who was in the elevator with President Obama at a visit that Obama was doing in Atlanta at the CDC there, and they lied to me about it. And I said, well, I'm going with the story because I have excellent sources on this, and they were lying to other reporters about it. But then I had the story first, and then the Washington Post cited my story, and the New York Post cited my story and confirmed it themselves, and then they had to back down. And what happened on that event was that Jay Johnson, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary at the time, was mad that he was lied to. They lied to him as well. And they didn't tell President Obama about this particular security lapse, didn't come clean with him. So he was mad, and he fired both of them, the communications director, Ed Donovan, and Julia Pearson, who was the first female agent, first female chief of the Secret Service, who they put in place to try to solve the Columbia prostitution scandal. They wanted a woman, the first woman chief, but she failed in that capacity, to be honest with President Obama and the DHS secretary. So I've been down this road before. I was a little shocked when I had been emailing and calling, and when I got to Chicago from my layover, I thought for sure they were going to call me, because I had just spoken to their top communications director, Anthony Guglielmi, a couple months ago when there was another security lapse at Joint Base Andrews that I broke part of that story. And we had a decent relationship, so I said, I'm waiting for his call. I think he's going to call me. Didn't call. I waited, put out another story about the misallocation of resources between the Jill Biden event and the Donald Trump event. And next time morning, I woke up. I was in late because I was delayed in Chicago for a lightning storm. I had 3 or 4 hours sleep. I woke up and Fox News was reporting at like 7 a.m. that Anthony was saying that my story was very wrong. So I just said, you never answered I just said, okay, if we're going to have this conversation on X.com, then why don't you answer all my questions that I submitted to you 14 hours ago? And I just said, okay, then, I've been down this road before. The Secret Service, I think that there's an arrogance there, and I think they hide behind the secret part of the Secret Service a lot. And only when they are under serious fire, like I feel like they're starting to come and develop better relationships with reporters just in the last few days. But the credibility is shot, and I don't understand why Anthony Guglielmi still has his job. He lied to the Washington Post, he lied to everybody, and then come to find out the Friday afterwards, everyone was reporting things I had reported on Sunday, but were told that they were lies or that I was very wrong. So, he looks bad right now. And so, but it was hard to do that week and continue on. Thankfully, my editors supported me at Real Clear Politics because they knew I was deeply sourced on this issue. But, I did have that hanging over my head saying, well, I'm going to stand by my sources and we'll see where the chips come out. And in the end, I think we were looking pretty good at the end of the week.
Secret Service, from my limited experience at least, has a reputation in the media and has since at least the Obama era for being kind of a mess. I feel like it's something that people sort of know. And I wanted to ask Susan how you would assess some of the media's coverage of this that you've outdone. You've gotten this earlier. On the other hand, it seems like some people have been afraid to tell the truth about Secret Service. What's your sense been of how other reporters have handled the story in the last month?
Well, it's funny to me that Kimberly Cheadle, the first interview she did sit down, and I think the only interview she did, was with ABC News. And it was with someone I'd never seen on the beat before. You have to know their games. They get into the semantic situation with you that, I said they were temp agents. There were a lot of temp agents there that day, and they call them by the acronym. No, they're CNOS. Well, CNOS is the lingo that the Secret Service community sources were telling me. We're using the term temp. So I go back to my sources and I say, well, they're saying they're CNOS. Yeah, that's the technical term for them. We call them temps. They're drawn from different field offices, but this is how they get you, and they try to manipulate the truth, basically, is they'll get you on a technicality, and if you're not seasoned enough, it's just to keep pressing and say, well, I'm comfortable with my sources, and I'm not going to sit there and let you manipulate. In fact, a few months ago, they tried to convince me and my editors to take the name off of the woman who had a mental breakdown at Joint Base Andrews, to take her name out of our story. And my editor, I said, that's my editor's decision. We did talk about it extensively. He made that decision, but you're welcome to talk to him. And he used the example, well, CBS News is not using this name. And I said, CBS News was just awful to Catherine Herridge, a phenomenal reporter. Why would you bring that up as the example that you're going to use with me? That has no credibility with me. CBS News, the way they're treating Catherine Herridge, no. That's not the pillar of journalistic integrity.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's a great story, Susan, because it's just too many people don't do that and just go along with it. They're like, oh, CBS did it. Okay, well, maybe I should do it too. I don't want to be the one who gets yelled at the cocktail parties or whatever it is. There's this question of incompetence versus malice at the Secret Service right now, and it's a sensitive issue for a lot of kind of average Trump supporters around the country who look at the Russia collusion hoax and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and the insurance policy, and they say, well, is there something like that going on at the Secret Service, and that can lead down horrible conspiratorial rabbit holes? But the country has sort of been through this before with assassination attempts. On the other hand, so much of your reporting is pointing the finger straight at incompetence, just straight at total layers and layers of incompetence that have been metastasizing for years as the media has let them get away with this, the presidential administrations have let them get away with this, and if there's one administration you'd think presidents would care about being competent, it would be the Secret Service. So help us sort of understand, Susan, how, there are a lot of conspiracy theories going around here, but to me it looks like this is just rank incompetence. How is the Secret Service so incompetent? And is the Secret Service so incompetent?
I think there's wonderful people that work in the Secret Service, and I think the rank and file are pretty amazing. The people that I've come to know and respect and admire, and certainly the people that were on the stage with President Trump that day and the way that they reacted, it was admirable. And anyone who's willing to put their body in front of a president acting as a human shield is something to be admired and respected and valued. And certainly President Trump has expressed that praise for that team on the stage. But when we're talking about repeated denials of security assets and the excuse is used that this is a former president, so we're going by our former president protocols, so we're not going to deploy, we're not going to allocate a counter sniper team until there's an incredibly heightened Iranian threat. I don't think that makes sense, and especially that's why I'm so interested in the exact allocation between the Jill Biden event inside a casino, 300 people or less, and an event attracting 50,000 people at an outdoor rally nearby. So we need to know that exact allocation, and that is incredibly relevant. And this outmoded protocol that we're just going to go by former presidents, like Jimmy Carter, and even President Obama, whose profile has definitely been lowered since he left office, even though he's still a powerful figure and deserves, absolute, wonderful assets in terms of security, because I'm sure he is still under a lot of threats, but nothing like Donald Trump, who's one of the most controversial figures in our lifetime and globally. And certainly we have this Iranian threat that's just deeply concerning to me. And I cannot emphasize this enough. If the FBI did not alert the Secret Service until maybe the day before that they were closing in on this Palestinian individual with ties to Iran who had an assassination plot against the president, an active one, if they did not tell them until the day before, that explains a lot to me. But it is ridiculous to have them the one investigating the Secret Service failures. They were part of the failure if they did not tell. Now, I'm also hearing murmurings, and I'm looking into this, that maybe they told headquarters and they didn't tell, and the headquarters didn't tell the detail. Well, let's look into that. The problem that I'm seeing with the Secret Service is layers of incompetence, but there's also a slight political element to this, and I don't want to get, this is not conspiratorial. This is just, why would you not think that Donald Trump breaks the mold? He breaks any type of protocol you've ever had for a former president. And why aren't you innovative? The same reasons why maybe you don't have operational drones, except tethered drones at permanent location sites. like Camp David and the White House and other places, but they're not regularly using drones at all. And so, I mean, that kind of outmoded thinking in resistance to change is a real problem with the Secret Service. And certainly, I think there could be a political element to it in terms of Donald Trump. Why wouldn't you change that outmoded thinking?
Right. No, that's so interesting, actually, because now the Iranian threat is looming and there's still a presidential election happening in this extremely fraught and heated political environment in the United States. So, Susan, last question is just, what worries you about the Secret Service right now? I mean, they're continuing to point fingers at local law enforcement, which even if there's validity to pointing fingers at local law enforcement, they're still the top dog. Buck stops with them. It is so classless. And I think this is just my personal opinion. It's classless and unhelpful for them to continue pointing those fingers. So they have a big job ahead of them. And as you wrote, they are, quote, in crisis. So what worries you? What are you looking for when it comes to Secret Service in the weeks ahead as Americans, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are looking around and thinking, what could happen with the rallies, with the parades, with everything going forward?
They are starting to get their technology, from what I understand, up to speed. They are starting to roll out their drone programs. They're starting to believe the people that that have always suggested them that they need technological advancements, and that's one of the reasons why I had that in email that was reply all. A whistleblower just couldn't believe that they finally instituted a R&D innovation division, and that's why this individual was angry, who's a counter sniper, who said, it's a little too late, guys. I mean, one person is already dead. So they are saying that now Donald Trump gets all the assets he wants. I think they're on high alert, but you can't turn this aircraft carrier around. It's like, you can't immediately hire people. They have to absolutely work with local law enforcement because they still have to rely on them. It takes a year to train a Secret Service, hire and train a Secret Service agent. So they need to have they need to just vastly improve their communications with the local law enforcement, which I'm sure they already have. Their command centers need to be coordinated. They need to make sure the Wi-Fi is working. I mean, all these basic things is just ridiculous. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're on high alert, and I still think they're doing an amazing job. But we also have a silly incident with a break-in to a salon on Kamala Harris's detail last week, and it's just, I mean, come on, guys, get the act together, follow the protocols, and work with local law enforcement. I will have, my latest story delves into some of the deep-seated, retaliation, allegations, and rancor and dissension on Donald Trump's detail. And I'm sure it's not going to make Donald Trump very happy and his campaign team to see this story. But they need to shape it up. People need to get professional, and I'm also concerned about their training. That can be, we can go into that another time, Emily. But they lowered their standards recently, and in order to fill some manpower shortages, and I'm not sure that's a good idea either.
You said manpower shortages, Susan.
Yeah, there's a DEI issue there.
I was going to say. Well, yeah.
I shouldn't use the word manpower. And manning the rooftop, I've also been criticized for using that term.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Well, this broader story, there's nothing funny about it. And Susan, the reason that the stakes are so high right now is it does feel like we're a powder keg in the country, and just all it takes for things to be thrust into even more chaos and civil unrest is a match, the lit match to be thrown on the fire. And it just feels like we're so close to that. So Secret Service needs people to be doing this kind of reporting to help them. So Susan Crabtree, national political correspondent at Real Clear Politics, thank you so much for stopping by the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Emily. Thanks so much for the interest in the topic and having me on.
That does it for us on today's edition of Undercurrents. We'll be back with another full show on Thursday, of course, but we appreciate you watching. This is been such a fun show. We have covered a lot of ground, and make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying the show. Undercurrents, this is the channel. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate all the subscriptions to podcasts. I looked at podcast numbers the other day, and it just meant the world to me. Sort of under our noses, the podcast has really picked up a lot of traction, and certainly on YouTube as well. We're very, very excited with the growth and so appreciative to everyone, every single person who has subscribed. Undercurrents.tv is where you get full premium content, but just thank you so much for watching. We will be back here Thursday with more Undercurrents.